The 15th of September, 1940. Late morning. 23,000 feet above the fields of Kent. Douglas Bader throws his Hawker Hurricane into a savage left bank. A heartbeat earlier glowing tracer rounds ripped through the air where his cockpit had been. The German Messerschmitt behind him has already sent 2 RAF pilots spiraling into the channel today. Bader never sees it. Neither do most of them. During the first months of the Battle of Britain, the numbers are merciless. Over 1,500 RAF fighters destroyed, nearly 800 by German fighters alone. In almost 3 out of 4 encounters, British pilots are hit before they ever glimpse their attacker. They are dying without warning. On paper, the Hurricane should survive. It can outturn the Bf-109. Every pilot knows that. But maneuverability is useless against an enemy you cannot detect. And behind the Hurricane's cockpit lies a fatal flaw, a vast blind zone. The armored headrest designed to save lives from frontal fire blocks nearly 90 degrees of rearward vision. To survive, pilots contort themselves in their seats, twisting until muscles tear and vertebrae protest, straining for a glimpse of danger climbing silently behind them. By October 1940, the average Hurricane pilot can expect just 87 hours of combat flying. Barely 4 weeks. That is the lifespan separating a young man's first sortie from his last. What none of them know, not Bader, not Fighter Command, not the Luftwaffe pilots stalking them, is that the solution already exists. It sits unnoticed in a small workshop conceived by a 34-year-old engineer with no formal aeronautical education and a pile of fabric scraps. His idea costs less than £1 per aircraft. The Air Ministry will call it nonsense. Senior engineers will dismiss it as impossible. Test pilots will refuse to fly with it installed. It will go on to save more RAF pilots than any other modification of the war. Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough, August 1940. Britain's sharpest aeronautical minds crowd into a conference room heavy with cigarette smoke and grim statistics. Diagrams of cockpit layouts and casualty charts cover the blackboard. We are losing the visibility battle, and Air Vice Marshal states, flatly tapping the Hurricane schematic. There is a blind cone directly behind the aircraft. German pilots sit inside it, close to 200 yards, and fire. Our men never know they're under attack until fuel tanks rupture. Solutions are proposed and discarded just as quickly. A redesigned canopy, 18 months minimum. Rear view mirrors. Wind tunnel tests show speed loss fatal at altitude. Cameras and cockpit displays. The technology isn't ready. Costs incalculable. A wounded squadron leader offers blunt testimony from the cockpit. Pilots are injuring themselves trying to look behind. Torn muscles, locked necks. Still, the 109 seconds slip through. We need rear visibility without turning, he says. Silence follows. The Hurricane's geometry cannot change. Armor plates cannot move. Production lines cannot stop. The conclusion is unavoidable. Nothing can be done. The aircraft will fight blind until newer fighters arrive sometime next year. Britain does not have that kind of time. That same evening, miles away from the conference tables and chalkboards, a man named Frederick George Miles listens instead of arguing. He left school at 16, learned engineering by building furniture with his father. Now he runs a small aircraft company producing trainers for the RAF. He spends his lunch breaks in the factory canteen, listening to pilots talk. One of them describes the moment before he was attacked, not sight, but sensation. A pressure in the air. A feeling of being hunted. That night, Miles stays late. He remembers watching fabric stretched across frames during a winter storm. How it rippled and danced, revealing invisible currents. Aircraft disturb the air in the same way. Every fighter leaves a turbulent wake behind it. An enemy must fly through that wake to attack. What if the air itself could warn the pilot? Miles cuts a narrow strip of lightweight fabric, mounts it on a simple wire frame. Nothing complex, nothing heavy. Places it where a pilot can see it without turning his head. When another aircraft enters the disturbed air behind the Hurricane, the fabric will react, fluttering, trembling, signaling danger instantly. No mirrors, no cameras, no redesign. Just air fabric and human instinct. A solution so simple, it seems ridiculous. And that is exactly why it works. The fabric strips would clamp onto the wing's leading edge, angled slightly upward to catch the strongest airflow. Total weight barely a few ounces. Total cost 11 shillings, materials and labor included. Miles stared at the crude prototype in his hands. It looked laughable, something a schoolboy might assemble for a science fair. He could already hear the Air Ministry's reaction, so he chose not to ask. Brooklyn's Aerodrome, September 3rd, 1940. Just after dawn, Miles arrived while the air was still cold and grey, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. On the tarmac sat a Hurricane Mackay, grounded for routine maintenance, officially unavailable for any kind of flight test. Unofficially, Miles needed 20 minutes. Albert Simmons, the maintenance chief, shook his head as he helped position a ladder against the wing. "This is completely irregular, Mr. Miles." "If anyone asks," Miles said, climbing up, "they won't." The strips attached with spring clips, no drilling, no permanent modification. 12 minutes later, it was done. The fabric fluttered softly in the morning breeze, absurd against the battered camouflage of a frontline fighter. Test pilot George Bullman arrived with a mug of coffee and stopped short. "What in God's name is that?" "A visibility warning system," Miles replied. "It looks like you've dressed a fighter in handkerchiefs." Bullman walked around the aircraft, eyes narrowing. No approval. No wind tunnel testing. No aerodynamic data. Those things could tear off at speed and damage the tail. Or save lives, Miles said. George pilots are lasting 87 hours in combat. 87. Bullman hesitated. "If something goes wrong, it's my license." "I know," Miles said. "And if it works, you take the credit. I don't want my name attached to something that looks this ridiculous." A long pause. "Deal." The Merlin engine coughed, then thundered alive. Miles watched from the flight line as the Hurricane taxied, turned into the wind and accelerated. The wheels lifted cleanly. The fabric strips whipped violently in the slipstream, but they stayed put. For 20 minutes, Bullman pushed the aircraft hard. Steep climbs, high-speed dives, violent turns. When he landed, his expression gave nothing away. "Well?" Miles asked. "They work," Bullman said quietly. "I had Simmons chase me in a Miles Master. Every time he closed inside 400 yards, the strips reacted. Different motion depending on position. I knew exactly where he was without looking." Miles exhaled. "Then we take it to the Air Ministry." Bullman laughed without humor. "They'll have you committed. Fabric tape clipped to a fighter violates everything they believe in. Then we don't go through them. We go to someone who cares more about dead pilots than clean paperwork." Fighter Command Headquarters, Bentley Priory, September 10th, 1940. The room was hostile before Miles even spoke. The same experts who had declared the visibility problem unsolvable now faced a demonstration board holding a few narrow fabric strips. Joseph Smith examined them with open disdain. "This is your solution, fabric strips mounted on spring clips," Miles corrected. "Aerodynamically impossible," one scientist snapped. The aircraft's own slipstream would trigger constant false warnings. Miles slid Bullman's report across the table. 17 simulated attack runs. 17 correct warnings. 0 false positives. Voices erupted. Unauthorized testing. Specification violations. Reckless behavior. Sir Henry Tizard raised a hand. "We cannot modify operational fighters based on a single unsanctioned flight." "How many pilots died while you discussed protocols?" Miles asked. Silence. "Yesterday, 14 Hurricanes were lost. Last week, 41. I'm offering something that costs 11 shillings and takes 20 minutes to install." "That's enough," Tizard said sharply. "No," came a calm voice from the back of the room. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding had entered unnoticed. "Show me how it works," he said. In the air. Protests followed. Dowding cut them off. "Radar was unproven when I approved it. So was the Spitfire's armament. Mr. Miles, you'll demonstrate tomorrow at Northolt. If it works, I authorize immediate field trials." "Yes, sir." "We're losing this battle because our pilots are fighting blind," Dowding added. "If fabric strips fix that, I don't care how ridiculous they look." RAF Northolt, September 11th, 1940. 3 Hurricanes stood on the flight line. 1. Modified. 2. Untouched. Douglas Bader examined the strips skeptically. "You want me to fly with handkerchiefs on my wings. I want you to live," Miles said. Bader took off and climbed to 15,000 feet. The two unmodified Hurricanes maneuvered into his blind spot. Inside the cockpit, the strips were calm. Then the left strip rippled. Subtle, unmistakable. Bader reacted instantly, hauling the aircraft into a hard brake. A Hurricane flashed through the space he had just occupied. "Contact," Bader reported. "Left quarter, 400 yards. Moments later, the right strip moved. Bader rolled again, this time catching his attacker climbing for altitude. For the first time, Hurricane pilots were no longer blind. "Contact right quarter." Both strips react at once. A sharp, frantic flutter. Directly astern, Bader calls, rolling the Hurricane into a tight barrel maneuver that snaps him face to face with his attacker. On the ground, Hugh Dowding remains stone still, but his chief of staff notices something rare, Dowding's hand tightening around the binoculars. The second run tells a very different story. Flying an unmodified Hurricane, Bader twists violently in his seat, straining his neck, fighting the aircraft just to look behind. He spots one pursuer by sheer luck. The other he never truly sees, only realizes it was there when it peels away. 2 contacts he radios after landing. "But I had to fight for every second of awareness." Back on the tarmac, Bader walks straight past the officers and stops in front of Miles. "How fast can you fit these to every Hurricane in fighter command?" Formal trials begin immediately. Over the next 10 days, 12 frontline pilots fly 57 simulated combat intercepts. The results are undeniable. Without the strips, pilots detect attackers before firing range only 31% of the time. Average warning distance 380 yards. With the strips installed, detection jumps to 89%. Average warning distance 520 yards. 140 yards. Less than 2 seconds at closing speed, but 2 seconds is the difference between maneuvering and dying. On September 25th, 1,940 Dowding authorizes immediate production. Miles' aircraft receives a contract for 10,000 sets. Installation begins with frontline squadrons at once. October 4th, 1,940, 2:15 p.m., 20,000 feet above London. Pilot Officer Eric Locke is flying his first combat mission since receiving the modification. He is 20 years old, 17 hours of combat time. Exactly the kind of pilot the RAF is losing too fast. No, 41 Squadron is vectored toward a formation of Heinkel bombers, escorted by Bf 109 seconds. The bombers are easy to see, tight formation, steady course. Locke lines up for a beam attack on the lead aircraft. He never sees the 109 diving from high 6, but the strips do. Both flare violently in his peripheral vision. Locke doesn't think. He reacts. He snaps the Hurricane into a brutal right brake, pulling until grey creeps into his vision. Cannon shells tear through the space his cockpit occupied a second earlier. He reverses, climbs hard, and suddenly he's nose to nose with the German fighter. Both pilots fire. The Germans' rounds miss. Locke's do not. The Bf 109's canopy explodes. The aircraft rolls inverted and falls away, trailing smoke. No time to celebrate. The strips move again. Another 109. Left quarter. Locke brakes left, spots the fighter instantly, and the dogfight begins. 90 seconds later, it's over. Locke has his second kill of the day. 3 bullet holes punch through the tail of his Hurricane. None in the cockpit. None in the fuel tanks. "I saw him coming," Locke says during debrief. "Not with my eyes. With those bloody strips? They gave me 2 seconds. That was enough." Reports pour in. Squadron after squadron tells the same story. Pilots are surviving encounters they would not have lived through before. The numbers confirm it. September 1,940 before installation, 73 Hurricanes lost per 1,000 sorties. November 1,940 after installation, 44 losses per 1,000 sorties. A 40% reduction. In human terms, 40% fewer telegrams delivered to homes across Britain. 40% more pilots alive to fly again tomorrow. The Germans notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports describe strange fabric devices on RAF fighters. One captured pilot admits they thought the British had developed rear-facing radar. Only after capture did I see them, he says. Fabric strips. Like children's toys. But they worked. By December 1940, the devices officially designated Airflow Warning Device Type M are standard on Hurricanes. Spitfires receive them in early 1941. American fighters adopt modified versions by 1943. Exact lives saved will never be known. Conservative RAF operational research estimates at least 340 pilots survived encounters they statistically should not have. 340 men who came home. Who trained others? Who flew again in North Africa, Italy and France? Eric Locke survives the Battle of Britain and becomes one of the RAF's top aces, with 26 confirmed kills. He credits the strips with saving his life 4 times. He dies in 1941, but not before training 12 new pilots. 3 survive the war, all crediting Locke's lessons. The ripples continue. Miles Aircraft Factory. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Frederick Miles stands among celebrating workers when a small delegation arrives. A young man steps forward. Mr. Miles, I'm James Nicholson. We spoke once in 1940 about visibility. Miles remembers. They saved my life, Nicholson says. Twice. Because of you, I came home. I married last year. I'll have children who will never know how close they came to not existing. Miles says nothing. An RAF officer offers an honor. Compensation. No, Miles replies quietly. I made fabric strips. Pilots saved lives. He refuses recognition, declines interviews, asks that his name be removed from official histories. Years later, historians find him. His answer never changes. I gave them a tool. The courage was theirs. Miles dies in 1976. His obituary mentions his wartime work in one sentence. But in 2003, surviving Battle of Britain pilots place a plaque at Brooklands. It reads, Frederick George Miles, engineer. His fabric strips gave us seconds. Those seconds gave us our lives. The lesson isn't about technology. It's about humility, persistence, and the courage to trust simple ideas when experts insist only complexity can save the day. Sometimes the difference between life and death is 11 shillings worth of fabric and the refusal to accept that young men should die blind. End.